This is it, fellas. We are on the precipice of the fantasy football playoffs. It is week 14, matchups that matter. I'm sure a lot of you guys are trying to secure a bye. You're trying to get into the fantasy playoffs. Maybe you're trying to avoid your league's punishment. Whatever the case is, I will have you covered today. We are going to set our fantasy football lineups, going through everything from over-unders, implied point totals, where the sharps are betting, and matchups by position. If you guys enjoy at any point, leave a like. Comment down below the types of content that you guys want to see in the fantasy playoffs. I'm always open to feedback and suggestions, and subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. Now let's get into it. All right, so getting into the Week 14 slate, we do have two teams on bye. We had 6 last week. This is the last week of byes, and then in Weeks 15, 16, and 17 during the fantasy playoffs, we should be home free. But if you have any Arizona Cardinals, if you have any Washington Commanders, you will not be able to use those players this week. So, tight end position, couple names there with McBride and with Logan Thomas, couple running backs, some quarterbacks that are relevant there as well. But let's get into the top 5 over-unders on the entire slate. You guys can see there Cowboys, Eagles, Dolphins, Titans, Chiefs, Bills, 49ers, Seahawks, and Los Angeles Chargers, Broncos, the top 5 over-unders on the slate. Bottom 5 over-unders, Steelers, Patriots, Browns, Jaguars, Jets, Texans, Giants, Packers, Saints, and Panthers. We do have some fireworks on deck with that 53-point over-under game on Sunday Night Football between the Cowboys and the Eagles, which will likely decide the fate of the NFC East and have a lot of playoff implications in the NFC in general. When it comes to Chiefs-Bills, maybe this one's a good fireworks type of game as well, although Kansas City has kind of been meh on offense the last couple weeks. 49ers, Seahawks, also a really good one. Same with Chargers and Broncos. A lot of exciting games this week. A lot of drizzlers as well. As you guys can see, we have 3 games, count them, 3 games with a sub 35-point over-under, which is pretty crazy. I believe 30 points that the Patriots and Steelers game is the lowest I've seen all year, followed by 30.5 points, which is the Browns and Jaguars game there. It looks like they are expecting Trevor Lawrence to be out for that game, and those totals are so bad that it's making like Saints-Panthers look like a half-decent point total. But generally speaking, anything under 40 is not good for our fantasy football players. So if you have players from those teams, I suggest you keep them on your bench unless you absolutely have to play them. Now let's get into the implied point total. So specifically, which teams are we expecting, or is Vegas expecting, to put up a lot of points this week? We can see a lot of usual suspects here, but I do think the Army Guy meme is kind of showing itself here, because when you look at the Miami Dolphins, the San Francisco 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Philadelphia Eagles, those are the 4 highest scoring offenses in the NFL, hence why their implied point total is very high. The other team that's in this list here is the Kansas City Chiefs, because they are the Kansas City Chiefs and they won the Super Bowl last year and they have Patrick Mahomes. But right now, they're the 12th ranked offense in points for, and they're a team that scored just 18 more points than the 20th ranked offense in the New Orleans Saints in points for. So for me, I'm not getting there with the Kansas City Chiefs. It feels like they miss their implied point total every single week. If you guys have Chiefs, it's a good in-game environment, but I'm not overly excited to see what they can do on offense until they actually look like the Kansas City Chiefs of old. Bottom 5 implied point total teams here. We have the Jaguars, the Jets, the Giants, the Panthers, and the Los Angeles Rams. So not exactly the type of situation we want to be looking at with these teams. Vegas is really expecting Trevor Lawrence to be out. Zach Wilson was named the starter today. Not exciting teams to have fantasy players from. As far as where the sharps are betting this week, so some of the nuggets that we want to glean from these is, hey, maybe these games are going to be higher over-unders than we think. The Atlanta Falcons, Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, a sub 40-point over-under. The sharps are actually hammering the over on that game right now. Then we have the Kansas City Chiefs and Buffalo Bills game, already a high total. Sharps seem to like the over in that one, so that's definitely good news if you have Stephon Diggs or Gabriel Davis or Travis Kelce or anybody from that game. Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, like I said, already the highest point total on the slate. 53 points is the highest I believe we've seen in a number of weeks so far, and the sharps are currently taking the over. So if you have CeeDee Lamb, if you have A.J. Brown, if you have Devontae Smith, if you have DeAndre Swift, if you have Tony Pollard, if you have either of the quarterbacks, if you have either of the starting tight ends, you're going to want to fire those guys up in that game. It is expected to be a barn burner on Sunday Night Football. As far as the games where the sharps are taking the under in, there's a lot of drizzlers to choose from this week, and we can see that Browns-Jaguars game and that Steelers-Patriots game already historically low number of 30.5 and 30 points. The under is catching 98 and 99% of the steam respectively. So if you have those players, if you have players from the Steelers, the Patriots, Jaguars, or the Browns, I don't think any of those guys are must starts. That includes, Calvin Ridley and ETN and Jerome Ford, guys that maybe Deontay Johnson, guys that you'd think would be every week starters. Definitely not the type of week where we only have 2 teams on bye that you absolutely have to start those players. And then, of course, the Ravens-Rams game, Giants-Packers game, and Jets-Texans game also not catching a whole lot of steam on the overs. All of these games are 40 points or less, not looking to be very fantasy relevant game environments. So as far as the advanced data points, you guys can see the fastest paced games on the slate. Of course, when games are fast paced, it means that there's a lot of offensive plays run, which is what we want in our fantasy football matchups. The Eagles-Cowboys, as you guys can see, has the trifecta. It's the highest point total on the week at 53 points. It's one of the fastest paced, in fact, the fastest paced game on the slate, and the Sharps are taking the over as a result. So that Eagles-Cowboys game, you want to start every single player from that game. Sneaky high scoring potential here for the Bucs and the Falcons because they rated both high in the Sharps betting the over, and we expect it to be a very fast up-tempo game as well there. So don't be too worried about your Bijan Robinson, your Drake London, your Mike Evans. It looks like those guys are going to be in a decent spot. And then some of the slower pace games there, Ravens, Rams, and Dolphins, Titans, and Giants, Packers, Chargers, Broncos, and then Chicago Bears, Detroit Lions. Not a whole lot to report there. Maybe that Dolphins-Titans game, not the most lucrative from a Titans perspective. If you're expecting them to just go up-tempo and try and catch up in that game, it might just be a blowout in favor of the Dolphins. They're favored by 2 touchdowns right now. So not a great situation for the Titans. Offensive DVOA versus opponent's defensive DVOA. So this is how good is the offense against the opposing defense. Ideally, we want great offenses going up against trash can defenses, and we basically have that there with the 49ers and Seahawks game. That is by far the biggest advantage on the slate, 37.45% advantage for the 49ers offense. So you're definitely going to want to fire up your Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle in that game. Again, usual culprits here. The Dolphins, the 49ers, these guys have good offenses. The Ravens have a great offense. The Chargers are a struggling offense, I would say, but the Broncos defense is one that is exploitable. Even though they've been better as of late, you can still get it done on the ground against them. Hopefully we get a better game out of Austin Eckler, who's been pretty poor for the last couple of weeks, and then the Kansas City Chiefs there as well going up against the Buffalo Bills, also a solid matchup advantage. As far as matchup disadvantages, I don't think I'm breaking any news telling you guys that the Jets, the Giants, the Panthers, and the Patriots are bad offenses, and they're also facing, pretty good defenses as well. But the Raiders offense is one that I want to highlight here. They see a big time downgrade against Minnesota. You got a below average offense going up against an above average defense in defensive DVOA. Could be tough sledding for Josh Jacobs, could be tough sledding for Devontae Adams, and I probably wouldn't mess with any other Las Vegas Raiders player, Michael Mayer, Jacoby Myers, Aiden O'Connell. I wouldn't start any other player on that team. As far as the shadow coverage matchups, so moving over to the wide receiver position, looking at some of the intricate details of the wide receiver matchups, you guys can see the Buffalo Bills, Kansas City Chiefs matchup. We have the Stephon Diggs versus L'Jarius Sneed shadow coverage matchup. Randomly, L'Jarius Sneed shadowed Romeo Doubs last week instead of Christian Watson. I don't know why he wasn't on Christian Watson, but that's kind of what L'Jarius Sneed can do because he took Doubs right out of that game. We expect him to be on Stephon Diggs. That is a matchup downgrade for him. Then we have the Panthers wide receivers, Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo, going up against the Saints secondary. They've been pretty good against fantasy wide receivers, even without Marshawn Lattimore, so that's not a good situation for them. And then we have Nico Collins, who's now, the clear number 1 alpha wide receiver for this Texans team with Tank Dell out for the season. He's going up against Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, both of whom are pretty physical, so I'd imagine they can match up with him pretty well. So not a great matchup for Nico Collins, although I still have him inside my top 20 at the wide receiver position. As far as neutral matchups, so we can kind of explain away some of the matchup downgrades that we see, but it's also not a great matchup necessarily. So Mike Evans is expected to see shadow coverage from AJ Terrell, who's a little bit banged up, and he's actually allowed some big games this year, particularly against DeAndre Hopkins a couple weeks ago. Keenan Allen is expected to see Patrick Surtain on the outside, but he is in the slot most of the time, so he's going to see a lot of Jaquan McMillan. Probably not going to get a lot of damage done on the outside, but when he moves to the slot, that's when you expect to see Keenan Allen get some work done. So those two guys, neutral matchups. And then as far as guys that we want to upgrade, guys that we think are in really good spots to smash this week, DJ Moore is expected to see shadow coverage from Jerry Jacobs. He can exploit that matchup. Good matchup upgrade for DJ Moore. Devontae Adams expected to see a matchup upgrade from Byron Murphy. So again, even though it's not a great offensive DVOA situation, Adams specifically has a good matchup on the field, so I wouldn't be too worried about him. And then CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks against the Eagles secondary. They've been really bad against wide receivers this year. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle against the Titans secondary. They are free cash to the wide receiver position, and they got to face probably the best wide receiver duo in the league. And then the Packers wide receivers, all three of them really are startable options, assuming Christian Watson is healthy. But if Christian Watson is out, you definitely want to fire up your Romeo Doubs and your Jaden Reed, and hell, even in deeper leagues, maybe you can mess around with Dontavian Wicks as well. So moving on to the positional matchups. So we're going to go through quarterbacks with top 5 matchups and bottom 5 matchups, running backs with top 5 and bottom 5 matchups, so on and so forth. And then I'll talk about some defenses and some kickers at the end here. So top matchups, as you guys can see on my left for the quarterbacks, and then bottom matchups on my right. For Dak Prescott and for Tua Tagovailoa and for Justin Herbert, all of these guys have massive ceilings this week. They're all in good spots to absolutely crush their opposing defense that they're going up against. I already talked about kind of the matchup for the wide receivers on the Dolphins. That's a great one. Matchup for the wide receivers on the Cowboys. That's a great one. And then Justin Herbert with that Keenan Allen slot matchup, he can definitely get it done there as well. So if you have those quarterbacks, you're going to want to make sure they're in your lineup. And then if you guys need a streamer, say you have Kyler Murray on bye or Sam Howell on bye or something like that, or you lost a quarterback to injury, Russell Wilson, Gardner Minshew, and Baker Mayfield, I believe, are the best streaming options this week. My favorite of that group is probably Russell Wilson, given the matchup upgrade that you're going to see there against the Chargers. And then as far as some of the bad matchups that I maybe would steer clear of if you have better options, we don't have a good spot here for CJ Stroud, so I don't think he has to be in your lineup. I have him just inside my top 12. I think he is my quarterback 12 on the week. Geno Smith and Matthew Stafford, those guys are outside my top 15 quarterbacks on the week, so not great options there. I don't think you have to start those guys, and in fact, I would start Russell Wilson, Gardner Minshew over both of those guys, and Stroud is your best option of that group, but he's barely inside my top 12 for the week. It looks like Trevor Lawrence will be out, so obviously don't mess with CJ Beathard, and of course nobody's starting Bailey Zappi or whoever the New England Patriots trot out there, so I'm not breaking any news there. Then we get to the running back position. You guys can see the top matchups on my left, bottom matchups on my right. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery both in an elite spot against this Bears defense. Austin Eckler, Breece Hall, and Javonte Williams all in great spots. Up and down play from those three guys, but I will say they're all top 15 plays for me, and apparently, I mean, Zach Wilson is now considered an upgrade for this Jets offense because Breece Hall went from Tim Boyle to now Zach Wilson, and even though both are bad quarterbacks, it looks like Zach Wilson's at least capable of moving the offense to some degree, and that's how, I don't know how we got here with Breece Hall, but this is where we're at with him, that we're hoping that Zach Wilson is starting games. It's really bad for the Jets offense. Anyways, the Texans backfield is also one that has a great matchup, but their usage is completely up in the air. Last week, we saw a recent trend of Dameon Pierce getting a lot more work. Fine flex plays for Devin Singletary and for Dameon Pierce, but neither of them are must-start options. If we knew one of them was going to be out, obviously the other would be a great option, but for now, I think it's probably a split backfield going forward. Tough matchups, as you guys can see on my right, for Bijan Robinson, for DeAndre Swift, for Travis Etienne, and for Tony Pollard. I would say Etienne specifically is the one I'm concerned for because he also will not have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback by the looks of it. I do not think he is a must-start option, even though he's been great all year. He is the RB16 in my rankings right now, but Bijan, Swift, and Pollard, even though they have tough matchups, they're still inside my top 15. And then we have Chuba Hubbard, who's the other guy here with a bad matchup. 2 good usage games in a row, 64% of the snaps in 2 straight games. Still a fine RB2 flex play despite the man matchup. And the Saints have been kind of up and down against the run. So those numbers look a little bit deceiving in my opinion. Then we get to the wide receiver position. You guys can see the top matchups on my left, bottom matchups on my right. We do have a great spot for Tyreek Hill, for CeeDee Lamb, for DJ Moore, and for DK Metcalf. Those guys are must starts in your lineup. I kind of already touched on some of them there. And then as far as the guys that are not typically must starts, but are probably good starts this week, Jalen Waddle, Cortland Sutton, Brandon Cooks, and then JSN/Tyler Lockett if you guys need a deeper play. I think either of those Seahawks wide receivers, all of the guys that I just mentioned are solid, ranging from like wide receiver 2 range with Jalen Waddle and Cortland Sutton, then more so like flex plays with Brandon Cooks, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. Those guys are all pretty solid options this week. Tough spot on my right-hand side for Nico Collins, like I talked about with the the shadow matchup. Calvin Ridley against the Browns, not a good spot there, although if Denzel Ward is out, that upgrades the situation a little bit. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, another tough matchup for them against the Baltimore Ravens, and then the Eagles wide receiver duo against the Cowboys secondary. Not a good spot for them, but that over-under is so high and that game environment is so good that I really don't care what their matchup is. Those guys are all in your lineup as top 24 wide receivers, although keep in mind they might have a down week. And then the Panthers guys, you can definitely sit them. If you don't need to start Adam Thielen or Jonathan Mingo, don't do it. Same goes for any tertiary wide receivers on the teams that I just mentioned. I wouldn't mess with Zay Jones. I wouldn't mess with Parker Washington, even though he was probably a hot waiver ad for some of you guys. And I wouldn't mess with Noah Brown, even though he was a hot waiver ad for some of you guys there. So those guys, leave them on your bench. Moving on to the tight end position, you guys can see on the screen there, Isaiah Likely and Gerald Everett make for good streamers this week. So if you're without Trey McBride because he's on bye and you got to go to the waiver wire, I think Isaiah Likely and Gerald Everett should be widely available options that you can stream this week with confidence. Jake Ferguson and then also Dallas Goedert, if he makes it back this week, are both must-start options as well. We don't have any confirmation on Dallas Goedert yet, but I'm just saying in case he does come back, he might be a decent option. And then without Trevor Lawrence and the matchup that he has, Evan Ingram is not a must-start guy, although in the game against Cincinnati, we saw C.J. Beathard kind of gravitate towards him. Tucker Kraft, Tyler Higbee, and Hunter Henry, all guys that can ride the pine this week. I don't want them anywhere near my lineups. And then I would also downgrade expectations for Dalton Kincaid. He's still a stud because, he gets all the targets and he plays for Josh Allen. But I will say it's a tougher matchup against Kansas City there. So finally, let's get into the defenses and the kickers. You guys can see the defenses on my left, the kickers on my right. Best streaming defenses this week, if you guys are looking for a good streamer, I think the Green Bay Packers are a premier option against Tommy DeVito. The Houston Texans defense going up against Zach Wilson. Of course, he always throws up a couple for grabs that you can take advantage of, and the Texans defense has been playing better as of late. The Detroit Lions against the Chicago Bears is a good matchup there as well, although they've been pretty bad on defense and they're on the road there. Pittsburgh Steelers against the Patriots on Thursday night doesn't get much better than that against Bailey Zappi, who's awful and scored 0 points last week. And then the New Orleans Saints against the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young, also a pretty solid defensive matchup. And then you guys can see the kickers there. If you need to stream a kicker, check out some of those guys. But that is the end of the video. If you guys got some value from it, leave a like down below. If I helped you set your lineup, hit the subscribe button. If you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, you're going to want to sign up over on flockfantasy.com. You can use the promo code FSE to get a 2-day free trial, 30% off any of our packages, and 6 months for free when you sign up annually. You can use our brand new Dynasty Trade Calculator, which adjusted for your league settings. If you play in a shallow league, it'll overvalue those studs like you need to. If you play in a deeper league, it'll value depth properly. All that good stuff is available on Flock Fantasy. Our brand new trade calculator now has rookie picks involved as well, and you can sort by experts. So if you want specifically my opinion or specifically Mason's opinion, or maybe you want mine and Danny's opinion on the trade, you can now, that functionality is now in the Dynasty Trade Calculator and in the Redraft Trade Calculator as well, if you guys are interested in that. But although your trade deadlines are probably gone in redraft leagues. So if that interests you, check that out in the link down below in the pinned comment and in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.